This is In the Trenches, broadcast 9.
Welcome to In the Trenches, where entrepreneurs, artists, writers, designers, inventors, warriors, and leaders share their stories of doing the hard, creative work that impacts all of our lives. Let the journey inspire you to do something worthwhile, build something bold, and create your life's work. And now, your host, Tom Morkis.
Welcome everybody to another broadcast of In the Trenches. Today's guest is a friend of mine and an online marketing strategist named Tommy Walker. Now, Tommy has a blog. He is the host of the Mindfire Chats and Inside the Mind, and he does a bunch of other really cool stuff. But bottom line is this: he really knows what he's talking about when it comes to marketing and getting results online or off. And we really dig into a lot of the stuff that he's done and what he's done to help other people market successfully online and off. So this interview was about an hour long, so I had to cut it in half to make it about 30 minutes each. So the first part, we really dive deep into crowdfunding like Indiegogo and Kickstarter. And the second part, we get into some more great content regarding content marketing and some other stuff like that. So stick around. I think this will be really helpful for anybody trying to start their own business. And this goes for writers, entrepreneurs, or really anybody in between who's trying to tell a story about what they do. So without further ado, here's the interview. All right, Tommy, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd like to start just by getting to know you a little bit better and letting the audience get to know you. So tell us a little bit about Tommy Walker, your website, and kind of what you do.
Sure. So Tommy Walker, I am an online marketing strategist, a video host, a amateur animator, and blogger, right? I talk about online marketing strategy. I try to do it in a way that not many other people are doing, by introducing humor and also deeper concepts to the online marketing conversation. And I'm generally just trying to help people understand how to use the internet and how other people use the internet in a way that is not obtrusive, I guess, but also entertaining and informative, and to sell your products. Let's see, the reason that came about, the reason I take my approach the way I take my approach is because for several years, for about 18 years, I guess now, well, 17 years now, I trained to be a performer. When I was 10 years old, I got into acting, and I trained to be a career actor for a very, very long time. And I graduated from a film acting conservatory, the only strictly film acting conservatory in the entire country. And
Interesting.
When I decided to make the switch from acting to marketing, for a long time I tried to pretend that I wasn't an actor. And then when I started to actually embrace that, that's when things really started to go much, much better for me, because I was bringing kind of everything I knew together. And now here we are, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's a pretty interesting story, actually, especially in terms of just how you mentioned just at the end there, that finally kind of taking your skills that you had built up until that point and applying them to the marketing world and to your online business, and how that had an impact on what you do. And so what I noticed and for the listeners out there who might not be savvy with it, I've seen your marketing show, Inside the Mind. So can you tell us a little bit about that and how maybe your acting skills played into, or your background in acting played into that?
Sure. So one of the things that I noticed kind of in the video series that are out there that are related to online marketing in particular is that it's a lot of talking heads in front of whiteboards, or people just sitting in front of the webcam going like, oh, here's this marketing concept that I was thinking about. And to me, that's incredibly boring. It's extremely boring, because who wants to watch just a face in front of the whiteboard, right? And if you look at kind of the culture of YouTube, those types of videos don't tend to do very well. Even people who are just talking to their webcam have a lot of editing, and they make the information more dynamic and keep your attention just through the presentation of the video itself. Back in December of 2011, I read a book that Gillian Smith had just put out. Gillian Smith being the co-author of Trust Agents and the Impact Equation with Chris Brogan. He put out his own free ebook, on Amazon called The Flinch.
Mm-hmm.
And what The Flinch is really about is identifying that moment before you have an idea that's going to be, that's kind of out there, and just that moment where you kind of hesitate or choke up. One of the exercises he uses as an example is like, turn your shower on cold and then see what happens to your body before you decide to go in, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know that shower is not going to hurt you, but it's this sort of instinct that we're pre-programmed to just kind of like flinch or tense up, because that's how we're designed, right? If you're about to get punched in the face, your body is programmed to do that. Well, the same thing goes for creative ideas and new ideas that you that are challenging, that might be a bigger challenge for you. So the whole book is about flinching forward, and it gives you exercises and practices to do that. The show came about because I had read that, and afterwards had decided I cannot hide from my acting background anymore. And if I'm going to put, I really wanted to do video, but didn't know how to approach it. And I said, if I'm going to do video, I'm going to do it in a way that only I'm capable of doing, right? Or only I'm capable of doing in this space. And that said, well, I'm gonna use humor, because there's a lot of humor to be had in the online marketing space, because there's a lot of ridiculousness out there.
Right.
And then
Absolutely.
the other part of that is, how do I make this entertaining? And, I coming from the acting background and writing comedy when I was in school, and doing a number of things like that, that's just what ended up happening. That's just what came about. And, we did the first episode. It took us about 8 hours on set to shoot, 11 hours, about 11 hours to shoot.
Jeez.
And then another 95 between the two of us to put together and edit. And the results was our first episode, and we loved it, and the people who watched it loved it. And we said, okay, well, now this is what we're doing, because this is, people really like the idea. And then we did 22 episodes. Originally, we wanted to do 24, but by the end, we were just so burnt out, because there was a lot. There was a lot to do.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I just had to butt in. How was that about standard for you then when it came to those videos, shooting and editing and stuff like that? You spend about that much time doing each episode, and I'm sure you improved over time. But.
No, every episode was about 95 hours, 95 man hours between the two of us, because it was myself and my friend Josh, who he had said, this is actually kind of interesting. When he had joined on, he had said, like, I don't know editing, but I know I want to help you. This seems like a really cool thing that you're doing, and I don't know word one about what it is that you're talking about. Maybe I'll learn by watching, but I want to learn how to edit video, and you're going to need help with this, so let me help you out. So eventually he did get up to speed, but this is something I do in my spare time, so it's not something like I'm not a professional video editor. So the time itself would have taken, probably much less if either one of us actually knew what we were doing.
Sure.
But it was what we needed to do in order to get what we wanted out. And as soon as we figured out, I'm a stickler for quality, and I always want to
absolutely
increase the complexity after I feel like we've leveled out. So. We'd get to a certain point where it's like, okay, yeah, this is easy. And I'm like, no, I want more. Give me a gun arm in this episode. Like,
yeah.
It took us, we did an episode where I had a little version of myself sitting on my shoulder.
Yeah.
And it took us 5 hours to just get all the equipment upstairs to a more open space and then shoot it, which was literally like, we were up there for maybe a half an hour shooting all the stuff. And then it took us another 5 hours to get everything. Like the whole thing was ridiculous in the long run, but it came out really well. That's our most popular episode. So,
right. No, that's interesting. It's a crazy amount of effort to put into it. And then, so I guess tied into that was where I first heard about you and what you do was actually through your Indiegogo project, which was for season 2.
Yes. So
can you talk a little bit about? I'm kind of curious about Indiegogo, your experience with it. for those listening, it's if you're familiar with Kickstarter, it's similar to Kickstarter. I know it has some nuances that are a little bit different, but I'd like to hear your take on it, why you went that route, and what you thought of it.
Sure.
Yeah.
So one of the things I wanted to do with the show is we didn't monetize the show at all. There were no monetization efforts. Well, we did have some, like with an affiliate offer, but it was very loose and weak monetization offers. And it's because I didn't want to, do the typical, like, hey, you watch my video, you like my stuff, now buy products, right?
Right.
That's so overdone in this space. And my whole goal with my video properties, anyways, is to mainstream the concepts of online marketing. Right. That's why I use the approach. And so anyhow, when we were talking about getting the second season off the ground, I said, well, why don't we do a Kickstarter project? Right. We actually were originally going with Kickstarter, and I want to crowdfund it because I want to get people involved in the creation of the second season.
Right.
And people in my own audience were like, why don't you just create an info product and fund it that way? And, it's the whole idea is to change the way that this whole market is perceived. Right.
Right.
So I said, we're going to crowdfund it. I got all the creative, done. I actually did an interview with, Entrepreneur on Fire, John Dumas over there about, this whole process, what ended up happening. Long story short, I did put it on Kickstarter. Kickstarter rejected it last minute. We had a power outage, and I had to find within a week a new crowdfunding platform to go on. And Indiegogo is a lot more open with their guidelines and what they'll allow you to put on there. It doesn't have the same sort of brand recognition, but we put it on Indiegogo and ended up raising. Our goal was $100,000. We didn't come anywhere near that. We got just under 5,000. But it was the interesting piece about the Indiegogo project is what that really taught us was where we were at, right? Our conversion rate on the project itself, and please tell me I have a tendency to ramble. So
no, you're good. I'm interested.
What we had learned from the Indiegogo project was just how engaged our audience really was and how many people were there. So what we had found was that we converted at 5.6%, right? Which is an insane conversion rate. I was so happy to find that. The problem was that we didn't have enough reach, right?
Real quick to interject, 5.6% of, and is that conversion rate based on like people that came to that webpage on Indiegogo, or what do you mean by that?
we had a total of I don't remember how many funders we had right now, but it was 5.6% of the amount of people who came to the site actually contributed to the campaign. So overall, what we had found was that that's a great conversion rate, and that people were really passionate about the stuff that we were doing. I got a lot of good feedback on the show itself, but the problem was we just didn't have enough reach. And what's interesting about that, I think, is that as a content creator, I create you create your content not in a vacuum, because you have people that you're talking to, but when you start to get a real metric on like, wow, this is what I thought I was going to be able to get, this is what we really got, it gave me kind of a place where I can start the new year saying, well, this is how I'm going to increase that reach. Because if I know 5.6% of the people like what I'm doing, if I increase my reach, then hopefully, if we're not doing anything different, that same amount of people are going to really like what we're doing over here. And we just need to increase the kind of exposure.
Right.
So it became this really interesting sort of algebra equation of like, where do I go next? Right?
Sure.
I think that's something as a content creator we often have a hard time with, right? We're kind of going, what do I do next? What do I do next? What do I do next? Well, this gave me sort of a finite, like, oh, okay, well, this is where we go next. We need to increase reach, and these are the things I know to do to increase reach, and now we're doing that. So that, kind of birthed my second show that we're doing now, the Mindfire Chats, where we interview big celebrity names, in both the online marketing and non-online marketing fields. So that's kind of, I don't know if that actually answered the question or not, because I have a tendency to ramble, but,
No, I think that was a really in-depth look at Indiegogo. And there's a couple things that come to mind. First, I guess digging back into what you mentioned about Indiegogo and the differences between that and Kickstarter. One of the things I've noticed was that I think Kickstarter is always you have to reach your goal.
Yes.
So if you put 100,000, if you don't reach 100,000,
you get nothing.
The people, you get nothing. The person like me contributing to it, I get my money back, so to speak.
Right.
So it's like, okay, but Indiegogo, I think now I don't know if that you have an option to do that, but is how's the case with that, or is it always just whatever you get, whatever is contributed, you end up getting?
No, so they give you two options, right? And basically they say if you hit your goal, then you get your goal minus 4% of the entire thing. So that's cool, right? So you don't have to. They don't take as much if you reach your goal. Which gives you an idea of setting realistic goal campaigns and whatnot. If you don't reach your goal, they have a flex funding option, which you don't have to take, but a lot of people like Indiegogo because it allows people to still contribute. That says you can still get your money, but we're taking 9% of everything for handling all the transactions and all that type of stuff. And what's interesting about Indiegogo too is that if you have PayPal enabled, then you get your PayPal payments right away. So,
cool.
So we saw kind of two influxes of finance when the campaign was going live. People who donated via PayPal, we'd see that come into the PayPal account right away, and then we had to wait for the credit card transactions to process. But because we were on flex funding and because we had PayPal enabled, we got to get that money right away, which was, I mean, for us, it wasn't the same, but if it were a different campaign, that would be extremely useful for getting stuff prepared for, fulfillment.
Sure. So, okay, I got a question on that then.
Sure.
What do you think of, I guess, two parts. One is the idea of going with that, where it's the flex, your thoughts on the flex versus here's the hard line amount that we're going to ask for, say, maybe 10,000 in your case, or 5,000 if you had expected that. What would you say is pros and cons to going with flex versus a hard line? I guess I don't know how to describe that, or the winner takes all sort of thing. And then the second question I have too is, in terms of that, what do you think that there was maybe a change in people putting money forward because you had put such a high goal? I'm curious, what your thoughts are on that.
So it's I'm going to address the first thing first, and then go from there. What's interesting about the flex funding campaign, and the reason why we did it, is, and I think a reason why a lot of people do it, is because you're not entirely certain if you're going to actually reach your goal, and you still want to be able to receive the money, right? And that's really useful for the people who are contributing, because you want to be able to do that. And I think that for us, and I can only speak for our experience, is that it was a very valuable learning experience to see that, we had this many people come in and they really liked what we were doing. And we saw a lot of familiar faces, but we saw a lot of new names that I knew were actually watching the show in the first place, but never really said anything. But when I, double checked my records and all that, I was like, oh, you were an email subscriber. You've just never reached out, but you liked the show. Awesome. So that gave us a really good gauge on where to go next. With the fixed funding, right? I think that's what they call it.
Yeah, fixed funding. Okay.
That's a really good way to show that you are confident in what it is that you are doing. And what most people don't tell you, and this is something that I learned kind of too late in the process, is that doing a fixed funding campaign is great if you already have big ticket sponsors lined up before your campaign goes live. That's a lot of the really successful Kickstarter campaigns, and a lot of the really successful. This is primarily on Kickstarter because it's all fixed funding.
Sure.
It's people have their big sponsors lined up, so you've got somebody coming in saying like, "Oh yeah, I'll give you I have a conversation with you, Tom. 2 or 3 weeks before the campaign goes live, and say, hey, by the way, next month, if you really like this idea that you and I are talking about right now over coffee, right? Then I'm going to be having this thing. Can I put you down for $10,000? And you say yes, sure, absolutely. Why not? I want to have my name on that. That sounds great. Campaign goes live. I say, hey, Tom, it's live, and now you're like $10,000, and everybody else is like, ooh, legit, and then they go for it. I only figured this out as I was about halfway through my campaign, and it was starting to not do what I thought it was going to do. As far as the psychology of it goes, I know that there are certain people in my audience who said that's way too much money. You're asking for too much. And the trouble with what we were doing is that it came down to two things. One, the angle that we were approaching, like we needed that. And the reason why we haven't started the second season yet is because we needed exactly the amount of money that we said we needed. So it was, for us, it was a matter of like, this is how much a good production costs and where we're looking to take this show. This is what we need. We need this X, Y, and Z equipment. And no, equipment doesn't do everything, but there's a certain point when you reach or you outgrow the equipment that you have. Right. Mm-hmm. It's like with a blog, right? If mm-hmm. at a certain point, you're going to need to hire a very good designer. Right. Mm-hmm. There's no way around that. And a good designer costs good money. Well, we wanted to do the same thing with our show.
Sure.
The trouble is that the angle that we were approaching it at was, we want to increase the production values, but the problem is that most people don't understand production unless you're in production. So that cost is like totally unjustifiable. So why am I going to give you money? Because what are you going to do with it, right? And even though we gave all the spec sheets on everything that we were buying and all that, it didn't really matter because it's like, you can build that at home. You don't need to have the professional version. And it's like, well, actually, there's a certain quality that's sacrificed with DIY. So,
sure.
So what that really taught us, though, was that the bigger funding, right? Because there are plenty of projects that get funded for $100,000, even more than that.
Sure.
Is that is really more about the value proposition for the person on the other side, instead of us saying, hey, we're going to increase production values and it's going to be easier for you to watch, which is, that's how do you quantify that? You would say, okay, we get to produce more episodes at a higher quality caliber that in case you're trying to pitch a certain concept to a client, we're going to have that covered and it's going to be presented in a way that they can understand so you can get more deals. Something along those lines.
Sure.
So that's kind of what we learned from that. I would say that if you're uncertain, if you haven't booked, if you haven't booked big ticket sponsors ahead of time and you were going to do a crowdfunding campaign, go flex funding. Mm-hmm. If you already have people locked down, though, and you should absolutely lock people down before you get your campaign to go live, in your pre-campaign, make sure you have that happening and then go fixed funding because it shows more confidence in what you're doing.
Interesting.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I've considered doing something like that, or at some point in the future, I intend to do some sort of Kickstarter, Indiegogo. I think because I've always just been interested by the concept of crowdfunding,
right.
And I think it's an interesting platform, and I do like seeing what people do and how they turn out in terms of success. I think one of the deceiving things, of course, like anything else, is that kind of bias, right? We see the successes, in Kickstarter, but unless you're paying attention to some of the ones that don't get funded, you don't recognize the failures. And I'm sure there's probably, I don't know the statistics on it, but I'm sure there's a ton of, and failure is probably the wrong word for it, but there's a lot of things that don't get funded on Kickstarter.
It's failure. And it's mm-hmm. about a 46% failure rate.
It's, it just makes you wonder, like, in terms of like, it's probably a really good idea probably before you do a Kickstarter to look at the failures as much as the successes.
The interesting part about Kickstarter, and I think Indiegogo has the same stats available, is that they give you, there's a whole page that talks about its breakdown by category. Typically we see this much success in the film, mm-hmm. film area, in the animation area, et cetera, et cetera. It's really, you have to pay attention to those stats and really dig into who it was that was like, who's in those campaigns. And you need to be looking at both who was successful and who didn't do as well. Because there's a lot more to learn from the people who didn't do well than there is from the people who did.
Yeah,
I believe, because these are, it's what didn't I do? You have to look at both, but it's like, if I were to run a campaign now, which I'm not going to because obviously I already asked for a bunch of people's money, but
sure.
If I were to run another campaign now, and come at it with a completely different approach, simply because like you've got that experience, you've learned. The other part is that there are marketing agencies now that specialize in crowdfunding and will only take a cut if they are successfully funded, right?
Yeah. It's interesting when you see these things kind of evolve and how they just kind of grow, and these different like tertiary kind of businesses pop up alongside them. So now you have this kind of cool crowdfunding thing. And now when they see success, somebody wants to get in there and be successful, you see all these different businesses popping up, I guess, to make sure that you're successful, right? Mm-hmm. These consultants and things like that. It's just interesting when you see it kind of grow and evolve right in front of you, this platform, for funding.
Yeah. Well, and if you think about it, though, it's like the crowdfunding concept is actually not much different than, pre-orders.
Sure.
Pre-sales,
right.
And we've seen pre-sales happen, way longer than crowdfunding has been kind of an in vogue thing.
Sure.
And it's the same type of idea, right? You need to make sure that you have, a certain group of people locked down, and then because you've got three groups of people: the people who have the big money that they're gonna contribute to your campaign because they like what you're doing and they believe in what you're doing. Typically speaking, that's venture capitalists, right? If you were to look at the traditional world, right. You have the people who believe in your idea, but they're kind of on the fence, and then you've got the people who are only going to buy if there's social proof. Saying yep. that, it's that other people are going to do it. You need to have those first people locked down so you can, show that big movement early mm-hmm. on in the process. Because if you don't gain traction within the first 48 hours, your campaign's doomed.
Right.
That's really what it comes down to. Is like, if we had raised probably $60,000 within the first 48 hours of the campaign being live, the rest of it would have taken care of itself. Yeah. And that type of stuff, that's a lot easier to get when you do the legwork of like securing the sponsors, like the big sponsors ahead of time. So that's what I learned. I could be completely off base, but
no, that sounds about right, especially based on everything that I've just kind of my own non-scientific studies of it and just watching people's campaigns and kind of interacting with people who go through those campaign processes on Kickstarter and Indiegogo. And you do notice some similarities between the successful ones. It's kind of like you mentioned, they have backers essentially before they start. Yeah. That back it initially, and you always have that big run right in the beginning. So they're obviously pushing out on some multiple channels through different, people that support or whatever, push it out to their audiences. So that's, I think, one of the key ways you could probably make a successful Kickstarter for those listening. I would say rule number one is that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that we did was we did a bunch of guest posts in a 30-day period. But I had the posts go live throughout the entire course of the month. Which I think if I were to look back on that now, I'd probably push everything closer towards a more consolidated, week-long period, maybe, simply because you want to have that appearance of being everywhere. Looking at different campaigns now and talking to different agency heads, some of the things that they're doing, like they get giant press releases on places like TechCrunch and the Mashable, and that's because you want that sort of exposure, big exposure, right within that window. Otherwise, you're not going to do much. Seth Godin did a really good campaign for his book, The Icarus Deception, and he did a ton of interviews ahead of time, and then that got people interested, and then everybody kind of signed on. And it's also Seth Godin, so
sure, it goes back to, I guess, in terms of having that audience to a degree. Yeah. At least partially, because clearly Seth Godin has a large audience that he can go do something people are going to follow and make sure that it's successful. For the smaller guys, though, I think that's one of the things that's probably disconcerting, I think, but for a lot of people like attempting something like that is that if they don't have that built-in audience, is Kickstarter or Indiegogo even worthwhile? And I guess, what do you think of that?
I think so. I mean, I think it definitely is because it's a good way to get people behind your idea. It's a good way. A lot of people are doing launches through there, but it comes down to the same basic principles, right? The big guy, Seth Godin, still did a huge, guest interview strategy before he launched the campaign, or as he was launching the campaign. So it wasn't just all a matter of him relying solely on his audience. It was a matter of I'm almost fairly certain that he probably approached some big name publishers and said hey, by the way, I'm Seth Godin. And I want to try this experiment out because the whole Icarus Deception book was about how the publishing game has changed. And he wanted to do it as an experiment. I think that even if what it really comes down to is, do you have those big sponsors top loaded? Doesn't matter who you are, because if you do, when you go live, you can look like a bigger deal than you actually are.
That's interesting.
See what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
You know,
yeah, that makes sense.
But it's a matter of like having that mission in the first place and then approaching people and saying like, hey, by the way, like this is what I'm doing and this is how it's going to benefit you and your audience. You know, I know you don't know who I am now, but if we get this thing going, like this is why it's important. And that's the big part, is like helping people to realize why your idea is important. And this really comes, I mean, if we had this back kind of the content marketing thing, right? It's the same type of idea. Why is what you're talking about important? Why should I read this article? Why should I invest my time with you? Why should I keep listening to this interview? You know, like that's really what it comes down to, because without any of that, you know, you're just kind of wasting people's time.
And that wraps up In the Trenches Broadcast 9. Now, this is a 2-part interview because the interview ran so long that we broke it up into 2 parts. But if you want to check out the show notes for this episode, go to tommorkes.com/broadcast9. That's the number 9. So again, apologies for cutting short this interview, but I wanted to keep this broadcast about 30 minutes, which is what I try to do for every conversation we have here on In the Trenches. So stick around for the second part in the series, and we'll dive into content marketing and some other really cool kind of online marketing information from Tommy Walker. Thank you, as always, for listening to In the Trenches, and I really hope you enjoyed today's broadcast. If you like what I'm doing with this podcast series, please consider going to iTunes and leaving a rating and review. Anytime somebody rates or reviews the podcast on iTunes, it gives the show more visibility and reach on the iTunes store. So consider leaving a rating or review, and I'd just like to thank you in advance for doing that. I really, really do appreciate it. As always, keep doing the hard creative work. We need you. If you're listening to this, you are the resistance.
Thank you for listening to In the Trenches. Your creative work doesn't stop here. Join the resistance, the small but growing army of entrepreneurs and artists putting a dent in the world at www.tommorkes.com. Never fight alone. Join the resistance.